Story 1. The Room That Was Never Cleaned. Daniel Harper had spent almost 12 years traveling across the Midwest selling restaurant equipment. The job wasn't exciting, but it paid well enough, and after thousands of miles on the road, he developed a routine. He avoided expensive hotels, never drove after midnight, and always stayed at small roadside motels just outside larger towns. They were usually quiet, easy to book, and close enough to the highway that he could leave before sunrise. Late one October evening, after a long day visiting clients across southern Missouri, Daniel realized he was too exhausted to continue driving. Heavy rain had reduced visibility to almost nothing, and the nearest chain hotel was nearly an hour away. The first place he found was a small roadside motel sitting beside an old gas station just outside the town of Rolla. The sign simply read, Pine Ridge Motel. Half the letters no longer lit up. Only 6 cars sat in the parking lot despite there being nearly 30 rooms. Daniel parked beneath a flickering light and walked into the office carrying a single overnight bag. An elderly woman behind the reception desk greeted him with a tired smile. She handed him an old-fashioned metal room key instead of a key card and apologized that the motel was older than most travelers expected. Daniel laughed and told her he'd stayed in worse places. As she wrote down his room number, her expression changed slightly. You're in room 14. She paused for a second before adding something else. Please don't knock on room 15 if you hear anything during the night. Daniel looked up. What do you mean? The woman hesitated before forcing another smile. We've been renovating it for a while. The pipes make strange noises. Daniel shrugged. Fair enough. He thanked her, grabbed his key, and walked back outside. His room sat near the very end of the building. Room 14. Immediately beside it. Room 15. Unlike every other room, the curtains were tightly closed. No lights. No welcome mat. No parking space directly outside. A faded yellow strip of tape stretched across the door frame with the words, Out of service. Daniel unlocked his room and stepped inside. It was exactly what he expected. Old carpet, a small television, a worn mattress, the faint smell of cleaning chemicals. Nothing unusual. After grabbing dinner from the gas station next door, he returned just after 9 o'clock. Rain continued pounding against the windows while trucks rumbled along the nearby highway. Daniel watched television for an hour before turning off the lights. He had an early meeting the next morning, sometime after midnight. He woke to the sound of a vacuum cleaner. At first, he assumed he was dreaming. Then he heard it again, the unmistakable hum of someone vacuuming the room next door. Back and forth, slowly, methodically. It continued for nearly 20 minutes. Daniel remembered what the receptionist had said about renovations. It seemed like an odd time to clean a room, but he rolled over and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains. As Daniel loaded his bag into the car, he noticed something strange. Room 15 looked exactly the same. The strip of tape still stretched across the doorway. Dust covered the windows. Spider webs clung to one corner of the frame. If someone had spent half the night cleaning inside, nobody had touched the outside in months. He walked to the office to check out. The elderly receptionist asked whether he'd slept well. Daniel casually mentioned hearing someone vacuuming room 15 during the night. She stopped writing. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Then she quietly replied, Housekeeping doesn't work nights. Daniel laughed awkwardly. Well, somebody was in there. The receptionist didn't answer. Instead, she handed him his receipt and wished him a safe journey. The entire exchange felt strange enough that Daniel mentioned it to a coworker over lunch. His friend joked that the old motel was probably haunted. Daniel laughed it off. 3 weeks later, another work trip brought him back through the same part of Missouri. Every nearby hotel was completely booked because of a local festival. Without many options, he found himself pulling back into the Pine Ridge Motel just before sunset. The same elderly receptionist recognized him immediately. She looked genuinely surprised. You came back? Daniel smiled. Didn't have much choice. She slowly reached for the key rack. After a long pause, She handed him the exact same key. Room 14. Then, almost under her breath, she quietly said, "If you hear the vacuum again tonight, please don't look through the window." Daniel slowly reached for the room key. The receptionist didn't smile. She simply watched him walk away. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, a cold rain began falling again, almost identical to the night of his previous stay. Daniel unlocked room 14, dropped his overnight bag onto the bed, and glanced next door. Room 15 looked exactly as it had before. The faded tape still stretched across the door. The curtains were tightly shut. The windows were coated in dust. If someone had been renovating it, there was no sign of any progress. After grabbing dinner, Daniel returned just before 10 o'clock. The motel parking lot had grown quieter. Only 3 other vehicles remained. He watched television until fatigue finally set in, but despite trying to ignore the receptionist's warning, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Just after 12:30, the vacuum cleaner started again. The sound came through the shared wall exactly as before. Back and forth. Steady. Almost deliberate. Daniel sat upright in bed. This time he listened carefully. The vacuum stopped. For several seconds. Complete silence. Then came the slow scrape of furniture being dragged across the floor. A chair. A table. Something heavy. The sounds continued for nearly 15 minutes before everything suddenly went quiet again. Daniel looked toward the window beside his bed. Beyond the glass, the curtains of room 15 remained completely closed. He remembered the receptionist's words. "Please don't look through the window." Curiosity won. He quietly pulled back his own curtain just enough to see outside. The parking lot sat empty beneath the dim overhead lights. Rainwater reflected across the cracked pavement. Then he looked toward room 15. Its curtains had moved. Only slightly. Just enough to leave a gap no wider than 2 inches. Someone was standing behind them. Not moving. Not stepping closer. Simply watching through the narrow opening. Daniel couldn't make out a face. Only the outline of a person standing perfectly still inside the dark room. His stomach tightened. The figure remained there for almost a full minute. Then, the curtains slowly closed again. Daniel immediately grabbed his phone and called the front office. Nobody answered. He tried again. Still nothing. Unable to settle his nerves, he got dressed and walked outside. Rain soaked through his jacket almost immediately as he crossed the parking lot toward the office. The lights were still on. The front door was locked. Peering through the window, he saw the reception desk sitting empty. The office looked as though nobody had been inside for hours. Confused, Daniel turned back toward the motel rooms. As he did, he noticed something that made him stop walking. Room 15 no longer had tape across the doorway. The door stood slightly open. A thin strip of warm yellow light spilled onto the wet concrete. Daniel stared at it. He could have sworn it had been sealed only minutes earlier. He slowly approached. The closer he got, the more he noticed an overpowering smell of fresh cleaning chemicals. Exactly the same smell that lingered inside his own room. The door stood open by only a few inches. He knocked once. No answer. Carefully, he pushed it wider. The room was spotless, cleaner than any motel room he'd ever seen. The carpet looked brand new. The furniture was perfectly arranged. Fresh white towels sat folded neatly on the bathroom counter. Not a single speck of dust remained anywhere. It looked ready for a guest to check in immediately. Then he noticed the housekeeping cart. It stood beside the bed. A vacuum cleaner leaned against it, still plugged into the wall. Its power switch was off. Daniel took one slow step farther inside. That's when he saw the guest register lying open on the desk. Curious, he looked down. The most recent handwritten entry caught his eye. Room 15. Guest name: Daniel Harper. Check-in date: tomorrow. Before he could process what he was reading, a voice quietly spoke behind him. "You're early." Daniel spun around. Standing in the doorway was the elderly receptionist. Except now she wasn't smiling. She looked exhausted, almost frightened. She told him to leave the room immediately. Without asking questions, Daniel backed into the hallway. The receptionist quickly shut the door behind them and locked it. As they hurried toward the office, she finally explained. For nearly 15 years, every guest who had ever stayed in room 14 for a second time reported hearing housekeeping inside room 15. Some ignored it. Some investigated. A few claimed they saw someone standing behind the curtains. Every one of them checked out the next morning. None ever stayed long enough for the third visit. Daniel asked what happened on the third visit. The receptionist didn't answer right away. Instead, she quietly unlocked the office door and pulled an old newspaper from beneath the counter. Across the front page was a faded headline describing a motel fire that had destroyed room 15 nearly 20 years earlier. One guest had died inside. The room had never reopened. Daniel stared at the article, then looked back toward the row of motel rooms through the office window. Room 15 was gone. Between rooms 14 and 16 stood nothing but a boarded-up section of wall where the fire had been sealed over decades earlier. There was no door, no window, no room at all. The receptionist quietly admitted she had tried warning him because she recognized his name the moment he returned. Every guest who heard the vacuum during a second stay appeared in the old registration book before they were ever assigned another room. As if the motel had already decided they would come back. Daniel left immediately. He never returned to the Pine Ridge Motel. Months later, while reviewing expense records for work, he noticed something he couldn't explain. His company had reimbursed him for 2 motel stays that October. The first, and another one exactly 1 year later. On the date of that second receipt, Daniel had been attending a business conference in Chicago nearly 400 miles away. He still has the receipt. It lists only one room. Room 15. Story 2. Someone else had a key. Emily Carter wasn't the kind of person who scared easily. At 28 years old, she spent most of the year traveling alone as a pharmaceutical sales representative, driving from town to town across the western United States. Hotels and motels had become part of everyday life. She always chose places with good reviews, checked the locks before unpacking, and kept a rubber doorstop in her suitcase just in case. It had never failed her. Late one November evening, after finishing a conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Emily still had another 3 hours to drive before reaching her next appointment. A sudden snowstorm forced her to abandon the trip much earlier than planned. The nearest place with vacancies was a roadside motel called the Sunset Mesa Inn. The building looked surprisingly well maintained. Fresh paint, bright lights, new security cameras. It wasn't luxurious, but it looked safe enough for one night. The young man working behind the front desk apologized that only one room remained available. Room 22, second floor, corner unit. Emily accepted the key card, thanked him, and carried her luggage upstairs. The room was clean, modern furniture, fresh bedding, new television. Everything looked recently renovated. As always, Emily checked every lock before settling in. Deadbolt, secure. Window, locked. Bathroom, empty. Finally, she slid the rubber doorstop beneath the main door and felt satisfied. If anyone tried opening it while she slept, the wedge would stop the door immediately. Around 11 o'clock, she turned off the lights. Snow continued falling outside while the motel grew quieter. Just after 1 a.m., she woke to a soft electronic beep, the unmistakable sound of a key card being scanned. Half asleep, she stared toward the door. Another beep, then the handle slowly pushed downward. The door moved less than an inch before the rubber wedge held it firmly shut. Someone outside applied more pressure. The door shook once, twice, then stopped. Emily remained completely still. A few seconds later, 3 slow knocks echoed through the room. Not loud, almost polite. She waited. No voice came from the hallway. Nothing. After nearly a minute, she carefully looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No sound of anyone walking away. She convinced herself another guest had simply gone to the wrong room. The next morning, she casually mentioned it while checking out. The receptionist frowned. Our key cards record every entry attempt. He checked the computer. According to the system, Nobody scanned your door after 10:48 last night. Emily explained that she'd heard the electronic beep herself. Twice. The receptionist apologized, but insisted the system would have recorded any card being used. Assuming it was some technical glitch, Emily continued her trip. She forgot about the incident. Nearly 6 months later, another sales conference brought her back to Albuquerque. Without realizing it, she booked the exact same motel. When she checked in, a different receptionist handed her another key card. Room 22. Emily laughed when she noticed the number. Guess I'm back in the same room. The receptionist smiled. Lucky room, I suppose. She didn't bother mentioning her previous experience. This time, before going to bed, Emily placed her suitcase against the door as well as the rubber wedge. If somebody accidentally tried entering again, she wanted to hear it immediately. Around 12:45, the electronic beep returned. Emily's eyes snapped open instantly. One beep, then another. The handle turned. The door pushed firmly against the wedge. The suitcase scraped several inches across the carpet. Whoever stood outside wasn't gently testing the handle anymore. They were trying to force the door open. Emily grabbed her phone and dialed the front desk. Nobody answered. She called again. Still nothing. Then, a calm male voice spoke through the door. Housekeeping. Need fresh towels. Emily stared at the clock. 12:47 a.m. She didn't answer. The voice repeated itself. Exactly the same words. Exactly the same tone. As though reading from a script. Then silence. For nearly 5 minutes. Emily stayed frozen beside the bed. Finally, she looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty again. But this time, lying on the carpet outside her door, was a single motel key card. Not hers. Someone else's. Emily stared at the key card lying on the carpet. The hallway remained completely silent. She opened the door only far enough to reach it, keeping the rubber wedge firmly in place. The card had no room number written on it, just the motel's logo and a small printed serial number on the back. She locked the door again immediately. The rest of the night passed without another sound. Just after sunrise, Emily carried the card to the front office. A different employee stood behind the reception desk. She explained everything. The attempted entry. The man claiming to be housekeeping. The key card left outside her room. The employee took the card and typed its serial number into the computer. His expression changed almost instantly. He checked the screen again, then quietly asked, "Where did you get this?" Emily explained. The employee disappeared into a back office and returned with the motel manager. Without saying much, the manager invited Emily into his office. He closed the door before speaking. That key card was issued almost 8 months ago. Emily frowned. So, the manager continued. It belonged to room 22. Your room. According to their records, it had never been returned. The registered guest had checked in for one night and was reported missing 2 days later after failing to arrive home. Police searched the motel extensively but found no evidence of foul play. The missing guest's belongings had remained inside the room. His wallet, his luggage, his car, everything except the room key. Emily felt a chill run through her body. The manager apologized and assured her the locks would be reprogrammed immediately. Still unsettled, Emily left for her meeting. She planned to forget about the entire experience. Late that afternoon, however, curiosity got the better of her. Before driving out of town, she stopped by the local police department. A detective agreed to speak with her after hearing why she'd come. When she mentioned the missing guest and the recovered key card, the detective quietly opened an old case file. The missing man had been named Aaron Whitaker, 36 years old, traveling alone, sales representative, just like Emily. He had checked into room 22 during a business trip. Security footage showed him entering the room that evening. No camera ever captured him leaving. Emily immediately asked about the hallway cameras. The detective shook his head. There weren't any back then. The motel had installed them only after Aaron disappeared. Emily thanked him and started toward the exit. Before she reached the door, the detective stopped her. There's one more thing. He handed her a printed photograph taken inside room 22 during the original investigation. At first, nothing stood out. The bed, the desk, the television. Then she noticed the entrance door. Something white protruded beneath it. The detective pointed toward the picture. That's how officers found the room. The rubber doorstop. Exactly like yours. Emily stared at the photograph. Aaron had been using the same security wedge she always carried, which meant whoever entered his room hadn't simply opened the door from the hallway. That evening, before leaving Albuquerque, Emily decided to make one final stop at the motel. She wanted to see room 22 one last time in daylight. The manager reluctantly allowed her upstairs. The room sat empty, waiting for housekeeping. Everything looked completely normal. As Emily prepared to leave, something reflected in the mirror beside the television. A tiny red light, barely visible. She walked closer. Hidden inside the smoke detector above the entrance was a miniature wireless camera. The manager immediately called police. Technicians searched the room and eventually uncovered 3 more hidden cameras concealed inside the air conditioning vent, the alarm clock, and a wall-mounted coat hook. None belonged to the motel. The equipment transmitted footage to an external receiver located somewhere off the property. Police expanded their search. 2 days later, investigators discovered an abandoned maintenance shed nearly half a mile behind the motel. Inside were dozens of electronic storage drives, camera batteries, and motel floor plans dating back almost 10 years. Most of the hard drives had been intentionally destroyed. Only one remained readable. It contained silent recordings from various motel rooms. Guests sleeping, watching television, talking on their phones, completely unaware they were being filmed. Then investigators reached the final recording. It showed room 22. Aaron Whitaker, the missing salesman. He woke just after 1 o'clock to the sound of someone scanning a key card. He placed a rubber wedge beneath the door. Moments later, he looked through the peephole. Then, without hesitation, he unlocked the door himself. He stepped into the empty hallway, walked calmly out of view, and never returned. Police still don't know what made him leave his room that night. No one ever appeared on the recording. No voice could be heard. No movement was visible outside. Just an empty hallway. Emily never stayed at another roadside motel without checking every inch of the room first. But even now, whenever she hears the electronic beep of a key card unlocking a hotel door nearby, she waits, just to make sure it isn't stopping outside hers. Story 3. The Guest Who Never Checked Out. Nathan Ellis had worked the night shift at motels for almost 6 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it suited him. Most nights were predictable. He checked in late arrivals, answered the occasional phone call, and walked the property every couple of hours to make sure everything looked normal. The Blue Creek Lodge sat just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, on a stretch of highway used mostly by truck drivers and people passing through on long road trips. It had 48 rooms, 2 floors, and rarely reached full occupancy except during holiday weekends. Nathan knew almost every regular guest by name. He also knew every occupied room, or at least, he thought he did. One Tuesday night, while reviewing the occupancy report before his shift ended, he noticed something odd. Room 31. Occupied. Paid through the end of the month. Nathan frowned. He couldn't remember seeing anyone go in or out of room 31 for weeks. Thinking it was probably just someone working odd hours, he ignored it. The following night, the room still appeared occupied. The night after that, still occupied. Curious, Nathan checked the reservation history. The guest had checked in almost 4 months earlier. Name: Michael Dawson. No listed address. Paid entirely in cash. No vehicle registration. No emergency contact. That alone wasn't impossible. Some long-term guests preferred paying weekly in cash. What bothered Nathan was something much simpler. He couldn't remember ever seeing Michael Dawson. Not once. The following morning, he mentioned it to the motel manager. The manager barely looked up from his paperwork. Room 31's been occupied for months. Guy keeps to himself. Pays on time. Leave him alone. Nathan nodded, but something didn't feel right. During his shift that evening, he decided to walk past room 31. The curtains were completely closed. No television sounds. No footsteps. No lights visible beneath the door. He knocked lightly. No answer. After waiting a few moments, he left. The next night, he knocked again. Still nothing. As he turned to walk away, he noticed something unusual. A newspaper sat outside the room, still wrapped in plastic. The delivery date printed across the top was 12 days old. Nathan looked around. If someone had been staying there, why hadn't they picked it up? The following evening, another newspaper appeared beside the first. Neither had moved. Now he was genuinely concerned. He used the master key to unlock the door. The room was secured from the inside using neither the deadbolt nor the privacy latch. Slowly, he stepped inside. Everything looked normal. The bed was perfectly made. Fresh towels remained folded inside the bathroom. No suitcase. No clothes. No toiletries. No food. No signs that anyone had lived there for months. It looked exactly like a room prepared for a new guest. Nathan checked the closet. Empty. He looked beneath the bed. Nothing. Then he noticed the nightstand. Inside the drawer sat a motel receipt. Check-in date. For months earlier. Guest name. Michael Dawson. Nothing else. Nathan locked the room and returned to the office. When he opened the reservation system again, room 31 no longer appeared occupied. It showed as vacant. Confused, he refreshed the computer. Still vacant. The reservation had vanished completely. Thinking the system had simply corrected an error, Nathan went home. The following night, he arrived for work and glanced at the occupancy board. Room 31. Occupied. Michael Dawson. Exactly as before. Nathan immediately checked the booking history. The reservation was back. Same check-in date. Same payment details. Same room. As if it had never disappeared. Trying to make sense of it, Nathan searched the motel's archived guest records. He eventually found something buried almost 8 years earlier. Another guest. Another cash payment. Another long-term stay. Same room. Same name. Michael Dawson. Same check-in date. Just 8 years earlier. Nathan stared at the screen, convinced it had to be a software error. Then he heard the front desk bell ring. Looking up, he expected to see a customer waiting. Instead, an elderly man stood silently in the lobby. He wore an old brown jacket, soaked from the rain. His hair was damp. His face looked pale. Without saying hello, he calmly slid a folded envelope across the counter. Nathan opened it. Inside was enough cash to cover another month in room 31. When he looked back up, the man quietly asked, "Has anyone been inside my room?" Nathan looked up from the envelope. The elderly man hadn't moved. Rainwater dripped from the sleeves of his old brown jacket onto the motel lobby floor. His voice had been calm, almost emotionless, but the question lingered in Nathan's mind. "Has anyone been inside my room?" Nathan hesitated before answering. He admitted that he'd unlocked room 31 the previous night after becoming concerned that something might have happened to the guest. The old man didn't appear angry. He simply nodded once, then quietly asked, "Did you move anything?" Nathan shook his head. "No." The man stared at him for several long seconds before sliding the cash receipt into his pocket. "Good." Without another word, he picked up the room key Nathan had already placed on the counter and walked toward the parking lot. Nathan hurried to the office window. There were only 4 vehicles outside. None belonged to the elderly man. He watched as the man disappeared into the darkness beyond the edge of the parking lot instead of walking toward room 31. He simply vanished into the rain. Nathan immediately checked the security cameras. The footage showed the elderly man entering the lobby through the front door exactly as Nathan remembered. But when he reviewed the outside cameras, nothing. No one approached the building. No one left. The front entrance had never opened. The recording simply showed an empty parking lot. Certain something was seriously wrong, Nathan called the motel manager and asked him to come in early. The manager arrived just after sunrise. Nathan explained everything. The disappearing reservation, the empty room, The mysterious guest. The security footage. The manager listened quietly before asking one question. Did he give you cash? Nathan handed him the envelope. The manager counted the bills. Every single one was genuine. He sighed, then unlocked an old filing cabinet beneath the front desk. From the very back, he removed a faded guest registration card. Michael Dawson, room 31. Check-in date, 20 years earlier. Nathan looked confused. The manager slowly explained. Michael Dawson had rented room 31 while traveling through Arizona. 3 days into his stay, housekeeping found him dead inside the room after he suffered a heart attack during the night. The motel quietly renovated the room and reopened it several months later. At least, they tried to. Every few weeks, another envelope of cash appeared at the front desk. Always enough to extend Michael Dawson's stay. No employee had ever admitted accepting it. Yet somehow, the reservation kept renewing itself. Nathan asked the obvious question. Why not stop taking the money? The manager smiled weakly. We have, dozens of times. The reservation always comes back. Nathan didn't know whether to laugh or walk away. Instead, he finished his shift in silence. That night, curiosity got the better of him. Just before midnight, he walked back to room 31 one final time. The curtains remained closed. The hallway sat completely empty. He knocked once. No answer. Then, from somewhere inside, a telephone began ringing. Old-fashioned, sharp, loud. Nathan knew every motel room telephone connected through the front desk. Nobody had called room 31. The ringing continued. Again, then abruptly stopped. At that exact moment, the office phone behind the front desk began ringing. Nathan hurried back. The caller ID displayed only one number. He slowly answered. Blue Creek Lodge. This is Nathan speaking. For several seconds, nothing. Only faint static. Then a tired male voice quietly asked, Has housekeeping finished yet? Nathan's mouth went dry. He asked who was calling. The voice ignored the question. Instead, it calmly continued. They said they'd be finished by morning. I'm ready to check out. The line disconnected. Nathan immediately called room 31 back. The phone system returned an automated message. This room is currently unavailable. Unable to shake the feeling that something had been missed, the manager finally agreed to renovate room 31 completely. Everything came out. The carpet, the furniture, the drywall, even sections of the subfloor. During demolition, workers removed the old built-in wardrobe that had been installed decades earlier. Behind it, they found something nobody expected. An unopened motel checkout envelope. Yellowed with age. Still sealed. Inside were a room key, a handwritten thank you note addressed to the motel staff, and enough cash to cover Michael Dawson's final night's stay. The envelope had somehow slipped behind the wardrobe before housekeeping emptied the room 20 years earlier. The manager quietly placed the room key on the front desk. The next morning, room 31 finally disappeared from the occupancy system. The reservation never returned. No more mysterious cash arrived. No unexplained phone calls came from the room. Everything simply stopped. Nathan still works the night shift. Every now and then, new employees ask why room 31 jumped straight to room 32 in the motel records, even though the door still carries the number 31. Nathan always gives the same answer. The room is empty now. It finally checked out. Then he changes the subject. Because even though the reservation is gone, he still keeps one item locked inside his desk drawer. The old motel receipt. The one he found during his first search of the room. Every few months, without anyone touching it, the checkout date changes itself. Always. To tomorrow. Story 4. Every window faced my room. Olivia Bennett had spent the last 4 years traveling across the American Southwest photographing abandoned highways, forgotten towns, and desert landscapes for travel magazines. She preferred working alone. It gave her the freedom to stop whenever she spotted an interesting location, even if it meant spending the night in a tiny roadside motel miles from the nearest city. Late one September afternoon, While driving through eastern Nevada, a mechanical warning light appeared on her dashboard. Within minutes, her SUV began overheating. The nearest repair shop was nearly 30 miles away in a small desert town called Red Hollow. A local mechanic promised he could repair the vehicle the following afternoon, leaving Olivia with only one option: spend the night. The only motel in town sat directly across from the repair garage, Desert View Motel. The place looked ordinary enough. One long two-story building, about 20 rooms, a faded swimming pool that hadn't held water in years, a gravel parking lot with only a handful of vehicles scattered across it. The owner, a friendly middle-aged man, checked her into room 18 on the second floor. As he handed over the key, he apologized for one thing. All the rooms face inward. Olivia didn't think much of it. When she reached the second floor, she understood what he meant. Instead of overlooking the highway or surrounding desert, every room faced the motel's central courtyard. Every window looked directly toward another window. From almost any room, guests could see straight into someone else's. Olivia laughed to herself. Not exactly private. She unpacked her camera equipment and stepped onto the narrow balcony outside her room. Across the courtyard, several curtains remained open. An elderly couple watched television. A truck driver sat eating dinner. One room appeared completely empty. Nothing unusual. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, she returned inside and began editing photographs on her laptop. Around 9 o'clock, she happened to glance across the courtyard again. The truck driver was gone. The elderly couple had closed their curtains. Only one room still had its curtains open. Room 11. A woman stood beside the window, completely still. She appeared to be looking directly toward Olivia's room. Olivia offered a polite wave. The woman didn't respond. She simply remained standing there. Assuming she hadn't been noticed, Olivia closed her own curtains and continued working. The following morning, while walking to the office for coffee, Olivia noticed the woman from room 11 standing outside. She smiled. "Good morning." The woman looked confused. "I've never seen you before." Olivia stopped walking. "You were standing at your window last night." The woman frowned. "I checked in 20 minutes ago. I wasn't here last night." Thinking she'd mistaken another guest, Olivia laughed it off. After breakfast, she wandered around town taking photographs while waiting for the mechanic. The repairs ended up taking much longer than expected. Another night, the motel owner apologized and offered a discounted rate. Olivia accepted. That evening, after sunset, she stood at her window again. The courtyard looked almost identical to the night before. A few occupied rooms, several closed curtains. Then, room 11. The same woman stood in exactly the same position. Same clothes, same posture. Watching room 18, Olivia immediately grabbed her camera with its long telephoto lens. She zoomed in. The woman never blinked, never shifted her weight, never looked away. It almost resembled someone posing for a photograph. Olivia lowered the camera and walked downstairs. She crossed the courtyard and knocked on the door of room 11. No answer. She knocked again. Nothing. Just as she reached for her phone, the motel owner appeared. "Can I help you?" Olivia explained that she'd been trying to speak to the guest inside. The owner looked toward the room, then back at Olivia. "Room 11's been empty for 3 days." Olivia pointed toward the window. "I literally just saw someone standing there." The owner slowly walked over and unlocked the door. The room was empty, freshly cleaned. No luggage. No signs that anyone had stayed there recently. The curtains facing the courtyard were open, exactly as Olivia remembered, except there was nobody inside. As they walked back toward the office, the owner casually mentioned something that made Olivia stop. "You're not the first guest who's asked about someone standing in room 11. That night, Olivia decided she was going to prove she hadn't imagined it. She set up one camera inside room 18 facing the courtyard window. Then she placed a second camera outside on the balcony aimed directly at room 11. If someone appeared again, she'd finally have proof. Just after midnight, both cameras began recording movement. Not in room 11. in every room surrounding hers. Just after midnight, both cameras began recording movement, not in room 11, in every room surrounding hers. Olivia opened the live camera feed on her laptop. One by one, curtains across the courtyard were moving. Room 9, room 10, room 12, room 14. Every occupied room now had someone standing at the window, perfectly still, facing directly toward room 18. She looked outside with her own eyes. The camera wasn't malfunctioning. The courtyard really was full of silent figures. An elderly man, a woman holding a suitcase, a truck driver, a young couple. Even the woman from room 11 had returned. Nobody waved. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Every one of them simply stood there, watching. Olivia grabbed her phone and stepped onto the balcony. The moment she did, every figure disappeared from their windows. The curtains remained open. The rooms looked empty again. Her heart was racing. She hurried downstairs and crossed the courtyard, checking each occupied room. Room 9. A middle-aged couple answered, both half asleep. They insisted they'd been in bed for over an hour. Room 10 belonged to an elderly man who complained about being woken after midnight. Room 12 was occupied by a truck driver watching television. None of them had been standing at their windows. Finally, Olivia reached room 11. The door was still unlocked from earlier. She pushed it open. The room remained empty. No luggage. No signs of anyone staying there. But this time, something was different. The carpet beneath the window contained dozens of overlapping footprints pressed into the dust. Every set faced one direction, toward room 18. Unable to explain what she'd seen, Olivia returned to her room. She copied the recordings from both cameras onto her laptop before trying to get some sleep. The following morning, she reviewed the footage frame by frame. At exactly 12:14 a.m., every occupied room showed a person stepping into view. The strange part wasn't the people. It was the timing. Every single guest moved at the exact same moment, the exact same speed, stopping at the exact same position beside their window, as though they had been perfectly synchronized. Later that morning, she showed the footage to the motel owner. He watched without saying a word. When it ended, he quietly asked to borrow her laptop. Instead of rewinding the video, he opened an old drawer behind the front desk. Inside sat a stack of DVDs labeled with different years. He inserted one into an old player. The footage came from another guest's security camera recorded several years earlier. At exactly 12:14 a.m., the same thing happened. Different guests, different season, different year. Every occupied room filled with motionless figures staring toward one window. The owner admitted he'd seen similar recordings before, always from guests staying in room 18, never any other room. Most people deleted the footage, assuming their cameras had glitched. Others checked out immediately. He stopped renting room 18 whenever possible, but during busy weeks. Sometimes he had no choice. Olivia asked the question that had been bothering her all morning. Why only room 18? The owner led her to a storage room beneath the office. Hanging on one wall was a faded blueprint of the original motel. Before renovations decades earlier, the courtyard had looked completely different. Room 18 hadn't existed. Instead, that section of the building had been an observation lounge with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking every other room. The lounge had been demolished after a fire nearly 40 years earlier. When contractors rebuilt the motel, room 18 was constructed directly over its foundation. Olivia wasn't convinced. Blueprints didn't explain synchronized people appearing in every window. Her SUV repairs were finally finished that afternoon. Before leaving, she decided to review her footage one last time. This time she noticed something she'd completely missed. At 12:13, 1 minute before everyone appeared, room 18's window reflected the courtyard exactly as expected. At 12:14, the reflection changed. Instead of reflecting the opposite rooms, the glass briefly reflected the old observation lounge shown on the blueprint. Large windows, old furniture, and dozens of people standing inside, looking out, not at the courtyard, At her. She froze the frame. Every face was turned toward the camera, except one. Standing closest to the glass was Olivia herself, wearing the exact same clothes, staring back into the room. She had never stood there. Police later examined both cameras. Experts found no signs of editing or digital manipulation. The motel owner permanently converted room 18 into a storage room a few months later. Guests no longer sleep there, but every now and then, someone staying across the courtyard mentions seeing a woman standing inside the darkened storage room late at night. She never moves. She never waves. She simply stands at the window, watching every room that faces hers. Story 5. The manager told me not to answer the phone. Brandon Hayes had been driving across Texas for almost 10 hours when fatigue finally caught up with him. As a regional insurance adjuster, he spent more nights in motels than he did at home, and after years on the road, he rarely paid much attention to where he stayed. As long as the room was clean, the bed was comfortable, and the door locked properly, he was satisfied. Just after 11 o'clock on a cold February night, Brandon pulled into a small roadside motel outside Amarillo. The sign read, Westfield Inn. The parking lot was almost empty. Only 4 vehicles sat outside despite there being nearly 30 rooms. Inside the office, the night manager looked relieved to see another customer. After checking Brandon into room 7, he hesitated before handing over the key card. Then he quietly said something unexpected. If the room phone rings tonight, don't answer it. Brandon laughed. Why? The manager shrugged. Wrong numbers. Happens almost every night. It's easier if guests ignore them. Brandon smiled politely, assuming the man was joking. He grabbed his overnight bag and walked to room 7. The room looked ordinary. Fresh sheets, clean bathroom, small television, nothing unusual. He ordered takeout, watched half a basketball game, and fell asleep around midnight. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the room phone rang. The sharp sound echoed through the silence. Brandon opened one eye. He remembered the manager's warning. After 4 rings, the phone stopped. He rolled over. A minute later, it rang again. Longer this time. Almost 20 seconds. Finally, silence. Brandon considered unplugging it. Instead, he closed his eyes. At 2:23, his cell phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. Seconds later, it buzzed again. Same number. Annoyed, Brandon answered. Hello? Only static. Then, the faint sound of someone breathing. The call disconnected. Almost immediately, the motel room phone started ringing for a 3rd time. This time it didn't stop. It rang continuously until Brandon finally picked up the receiver. Hello? The line remained silent. Then a calm female voice whispered, Don't open the door. The call ended. Brandon frowned. He waited. Nothing happened. Assuming someone was playing a stupid prank, he returned the receiver to its cradle. Exactly 30 seconds later, 3 slow knocks echoed against his motel door. Knock, knock, knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to wake someone. Brandon walked toward the window and carefully pulled the curtain aside. Nobody stood outside. The walkway was empty. He opened the door anyway. The cold night air rushed inside. The parking lot sat completely still. Not a single person was visible. Confused, he locked the door again. The phone immediately rang. He answered without thinking. The same female voice returned. I told you not to open it. Before Brandon could respond, the line went dead. Now genuinely unsettled, he called the front office. The manager answered immediately. Did you answer the phone? Brandon admitted he had. There was a long silence. Finally, the manager quietly asked, Did you open your door too? Brandon said yes. The manager sighed. Lock it. Don't answer again. Whatever happens, stay inside until sunrise. Then he hung up. Brandon stared at the receiver in disbelief. He considered packing his bags and leaving immediately. Instead, he checked every lock again. The deadbolt, secure. The window, locked. Bathroom, empty. As he stepped back into the room, he noticed something lying on the carpet just inside the entrance. A white envelope. He was certain it hadn't been there a minute earlier. There was no name written on it. Only 3 handwritten words. Too late now. Brandon picked up the envelope. It felt completely dry, which made no sense. Only seconds earlier, he'd opened the motel door to freezing rain. If someone had slipped the envelope underneath, the paper should have been damp. He carefully unfolded it. Inside was a single motel receipt. Room 7. Checkout time, 2:18 a.m. The time on Brandon's phone read 2:29. According to the receipt, he had already checked out. Before he could think any further, the room phone rang again. He stared at it. The manager had been very clear. Don't answer again. The ringing continued for almost a minute before finally stopping. Then, someone slowly tried the door handle. Once, twice. The deadbolt rattled quietly. Brandon held his breath. A calm male voice spoke from the hallway. Front desk. Just checking everything's all right. Brandon immediately recognized the problem. The night manager was still in the office. He'd spoken to him less than 5 minutes earlier. Without making a sound, Brandon stepped away from the door. The handle stopped moving. Several seconds passed. Then, 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Exactly like before. The footsteps never walked away. Whoever stood outside remained there, waiting. Almost 10 minutes passed before Brandon finally heard footsteps moving down the walkway. He looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Not a single person in sight. Unable to settle his nerves, Brandon quietly called the front office again. The manager answered on the first ring. Before Brandon could speak, the manager asked one question. Is it still outside? Brandon froze. He hadn't mentioned anyone being outside. He whispered, How did you know? The manager took a long breath. Because it always waits after someone answers. Brandon demanded an explanation. The manager reluctantly admitted the same thing had happened several times over the past few years. Guests who answered the late-night calls almost always reported hearing knocking afterward. Some ignored it. Some opened the door. Most checked out before sunrise. The manager had started warning every guest in room 7 after noticing the pattern. Brandon asked why only room 7. The manager quietly admitted he didn't know. The room had been renovated twice. The locks replaced. The phone line rewired. Nothing changed. At exactly 3:04 a.m., the electricity briefly flickered. Every light in the room went dark for less than 2 seconds. When they came back on, the room phone had disappeared. Brandon stared at the empty nightstand. The telephone cord still hung from the wall, but the phone itself was gone. His breathing quickened. He looked around the room. Everything else remained exactly where it belonged. Only the telephone had vanished. Then his cell phone rang. The screen displayed room 7. His hands trembled as he answered. This time, the familiar female voice sounded clearer than before. Don't look outside. Brandon instinctively turned toward the window anyway. The curtains were still closed. The voice immediately whispered, Too late. The call ended. Before he could react, a shadow slowly passed across the curtains. Not someone walking by. Someone standing directly outside the window. Perfectly still. The silhouette remained there for nearly 30 seconds before drifting away into the darkness. Brandon didn't move for the rest of the night. He sat against the wall with every light on until the first signs of sunrise appeared through the curtains. At exactly 6 o'clock, he left the room. The night manager was already waiting outside the office. Without saying a word, he asked Brandon for the room key. As Brandon handed it over, he noticed another employee entering room 7 with a cleaning cart. The room hadn't even been inspected yet. Curious, Brandon asked why housekeeping had arrived so early. The manager looked confused. We don't have housekeeping until 8. Both men turned. The cleaning cart was gone. The door to room 7 stood closed. No employee was anywhere in sight. Police later searched the motel after Brandon reported the strange events. They found nothing unusual inside the room. No hidden entrances. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints on the envelope. No explanation for how it had appeared inside the locked room. Before leaving town, Brandon asked the manager one final question. How many guests have actually disappeared from room 7? The manager looked surprised. None. Not one. Then he added something Brandon never forgot. That's why I warn people. The calls don't seem to be trying to lure anyone out. They seem to be trying to keep someone in. Months later, Brandon received a copy of the motel's phone records after investigators closed the case. Every incoming call to room 7 that night had originated from the same extension. Extension 7. The room itself. There was one final entry on the report. At 2:16 a.m., 1 minute before the first phone rang, room 7 had placed an outgoing call to the front desk. The recording still existed. Investigators played it several times. For almost 20 seconds, nothing could be heard except faint static. Then a tired male voice quietly said, "Don't let me answer the phone." The voice matched Brandon's. The timestamp showed it had been recorded before he'd even arrived at the motel.